I wasn't there at the beginning, but although I did actually work for it quite soon after its inception. But the idea was to fill in what was known as the opt-out slot. In other words, it was a slot on the television schedule that was seen only in London and the South East. And so the producer, Ian Johnston, decided to do this film review programme with the idea that he would use it, and the BBC would use it, to find new presenters for television. So they changed the presenter every few weeks. Ian phoned me up out of the blue. I didn't know him. I'd never even watched the programme. And he said, I read your stuff in The Guardian, because by that time I was a freelance journalist and I was writing a weekly humorous column in The Guardian. And he said, I like that, and do you think you could bring the same approach to bear to reviewing films? And I thought that I probably could. And so he signed me up, and my first contract was for 3 weeks with a 3-week option, exercisable only by the BBC. So they weren't taking a hell of a chance, But in fact, I did 9 weeks in that first stint. Then I alternated with various other people until about the spring of 1973, and then, with the exception of 1 year when I went off to present Omnibus, I've been doing it ever since. I got into journalism simply because when I was 17 I'd just taken my A-levels, and I was discussing with my father, who was a film producer at Ealing Studios, what I might do with my life. And we talked about the film industry, and he said, sure, if you really want to get in the film industry, I'll help you, but I've got to tell you, it's in a slump at the moment. There are thousands of highly qualified men out of work. So there's no guarantee that if you've got a job, you'll be able to keep it for long. And then we discussed alternatives. And at that time, for reasons which now escape me entirely, what I really fancied being was a foreign correspondent for the Daily Express. I mean, I can't think of anything I'd hate worse now. But, so I went into journalism, and I've never regretted it, actually. I had a great time working on local papers in London, worked in Johannesburg, in what used to be called Salisbury, is now called Harare, but worked in Fleet Street for the Daily Mail and various other papers. I had a great time doing that. I think it was the best choice for me.
If you did have any regrets, would it be that you didn't go into the industry itself as a producer or director? If
I was going in, I should have gone in at the start and gone into the cutting rooms, as my father did. My father was reckoned to be just about the best film editor in Britain at the time, the beginning of the last war. And I've always believed that editors make the best directors, David Lean being a perfect example. I think that would have been the time to go in, learn the trade that way, then go on to producing and directing. I did have an opportunity when I was, I suppose, in my early 30s to leave newspapers and go and work for a film producer in London, and I thought about it quite hard, and then I decided not to, and I'm kind of glad I made that decision.
So presumably you watched the Ealing comedies with added interest, do you?
Yeah, well, my father made one of them, A Run for Your Money, with Alec Guinness and Meredith Edwards. Yes, I was a huge, and still am, a huge fan of the Ealing comedies. I think that was a golden age of British cinema when Ealing was at its very best in the, I suppose from the late 40s on to about 1960, when it more or less folded up.
You've written 10 novels as well. Now, when did the novel writing begin?
Well, the novel writing has always been in my mind. In my 20s, I must have started writing at least 10 novels and never got close to finishing them, because they all started out with what I thought was an absolutely brilliant idea, and then I'd get to a certain stage and suddenly realise that this idea wasn't going anywhere, and there was nowhere it could possibly go, and that there was no end in sight. I might even have got to what would have been the middle of the book, but there was no way of ending it, so I abandoned all those. So it's always been something I've wanted to do, and in fact, while I was still working for the Daily Mail, I did finally finish and have published not one but 2 novels. So I was a novelist before I went into television.